Greenville, South Carolina, August 16, 2026. A friend makes a phone call at 1:50 in the afternoon. The dispatcher notes the address, notes the situation. Cardiac arrest, unresponsive female. Emergency medical services arrive. They work for as long as working is possible. At 2:32 p.m., it stops being possible. She was 36 years old, 5 days from 37. Her name was Hayden Panettiere. A generation of Americans knew that name before they knew much else about popular culture. From a cheerleader on a network drama who could not be killed, from a country singer on a primetime show who kept destroying herself and coming back, from a face on a Neutrogena billboard that looked directly at the camera with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing exactly that since she was 11 months old. 3 months earlier, she had published a book. In it, she described what that face had cost.
The pills handed to her at 15 by the people paid to manage her image. The rooms she was walked into before she was old enough to understand that she was allowed to leave. The papers she signed that put her daughter on the other side of the world. The warning a doctor delivered when her liver had absorbed all it could absorb, that she would be dead within 5 years if she did not stop. She had not stopped. Then she had. Then, on the morning of August 16th, she was gone. The book returned to number 1. Here is what 36 years inside the machine that built Hayden Panettiere actually looked like. And here is the one detail, buried in the record, that tells you everything about what the industry owed her and never once paid. The camera does not wait for you to be ready. Palisades, New York, 1990. A woman named Lesley Vogel, a former soap opera actress who understood with the precision of someone who had once stood in front of the lens herself exactly what the industry required, positioned her 11-month-old daughter in front of a camera for a play school commercial. The baby did not know what a camera was. She did not know what a contract was, or a call time, or a morality clause. She could not yet walk with any confidence, let alone negotiate the terms of her own image. What she could do was perform. And that, her mother had decided, was enough to begin. Her name was Hayden Lesley Panettiere. She had been born on August 21st, 1989 in Palisades, a small commuter town 25 miles north of Manhattan, the kind of place where children ride bikes to school and summer runs long. Her father, Alan Skip Panettiere, was a New York City fire captain. Her mother was something else entirely. Lesley Vogel had not made it as an actress in the way she had hoped, but she recognized star power when she looked at her daughter, and she moved accordingly. By 8 months old, Hayden had already been signed with Wilhelmina Models. That sentence is worth pausing on. 8 months old. Before she could form a complete sentence, before she had any concept of herself as a person separate from the adults around her, she was already a professional with a representation. By the time she was 4, she had landed a recurring role on One Life to Live, ABC's long-running daytime soap opera, playing a character named Sarah Roberts. She would hold that role for 3 years. Then she moved to Guiding Light on CBS, 45 episodes over 4 years as Lizzie Spaulding. The plot lines she was given were not gentle. She played a child who got kidnapped, a child who killed another character, a child who survived leukemia. As Panettiere would later reflect, those extreme stories were, in her own words, not good for my developing brain. She played suffering because suffering was what the script required. She was rewarded with attention, with praise, with more work. This is the machine's first lesson, and it is the one that lodges deepest. Perform the pain, and the adults around you will love you for it. In her memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning, published in May 2026, Panettiere put it in terms that are precise enough to ache. Grown-ups gave me positive attention,
she wrote, when, as an actor, I failed, got sick, screamed and cried, killed, grieved, and suffered. Reality merged with my imagination and burrowed into my core memories, where all my shame and trauma lives. She wrote those words at 36. She had been trying to unlearn the equation for most of her life. The years between 5 and 17 were relentless. A Bug's Life in 1998. A voice role for Pixar, the studio that had just invented a new category of celebrity. Then Remember the Titans in 2000, opposite Denzel Washington, playing the daughter of a football coach in the most beloved sports film of its generation. She was 11 years old, and she held her own in every frame she shared with one of the most decorated actors in American cinema. Hollywood noticed. Neutrogena noticed too. By the time she was a teenager, the skincare company had made her their global face, a 10-year partnership that came with a squeaky clean product identity and a strict morality clause that, as she later wrote, helped dictate every outfit I wore, every hair and makeup choice, and how I acted when I was out on the town. She was 15 years old. Her image was already owned by someone else's contract.
In 2005, while filming Racing Stripes, a family comedy about a zebra who believes himself to be a racehorse, Panettiere fell from the animal and suffered injuries to her neck and back. She kept quiet about it. She wrote in her memoir 2 decades later that she kept her mouth shut and endured the pain. The back and neck problems would follow her for the rest of her life. But silence was the job. The camera was waiting. And then something else started, something she would not name publicly for many years. Sometime around the age of 15, on the red carpets, before the interviews, before the handlers handed her to the press, a member of her public relations team began offering her pills. Small ones, easy to swallow. She wrote that she believed them to be amphetamines. No one asked her consent. No one offered an explanation. I didn't ask questions, she wrote, and she didn't formally seek my consent. But I didn't think twice. I trusted the people I worked with, especially my team. So I popped the pill in my mouth and swallowed. They kept her focused, peppy, present. They kept her performing. They were the gateway drug, she wrote, that ushered me toward the good of pharmaceuticals and the downfall of addiction. She was 15. The machine had just handed her the first of many things it would one day use against her. The Neutrogena contract, the soap opera plot lines, the pills before the red carpets. None of these were visible to the audience that watched her. What they saw was a composed, luminous girl who seemed to carry her career with an effortlessness that bordered on gift. What she was learning, with every year, was something different. That her value was entirely contingent on her performance, that the adults around her required the performance to continue regardless of what it cost her, and that the appropriate response to any form of difficulty was to keep your mouth shut and do your job. In 2006, a network television show called Heroes went into production at NBC. The premise was simple and mythic. Ordinary people develop extraordinary powers. Hayden Panettiere was cast as Claire Bennett, a 17-year-old cheerleader who cannot be killed. No matter how she falls, how she breaks, how she is damaged, her body repairs itself, she heals, she regenerates. She is, the tagline announces, indestructible. The show would give her its most famous sentence. The sentence would follow her everywhere she went for the rest of her life. Save the cheerleader, save the world. What no one considered, not yet, was what it meant to cast a girl who had been performing pain since she was 4 years old in the role of someone the world could not hurt. Heroes premiered on NBC on September 25, 2006, and became, almost immediately, one of the most watched dramas on American television.
17 million people tuned in for the pilot. By the end of the first season, Claire Bennett, the cheerleader from Odessa, Texas, who could walk away from anything, had become the show's emotional center. Fan forums devoted entire threads to her. The tagline moved off television and into the culture, the way only a handful of phrases in any given decade managed to do. Bumper stickers, T-shirts, the kind of repetition that means a sentence has become shorthand for something larger than itself. Hayden Panettiere was 17 years old. She was, by every visible measure, exactly where the machine had always intended her to be.
If you have followed this story so far and want to follow it to its end, because the end matters, and because the end is the thing the headlines did not tell you, now is the time to stay. This is the part where the halo holds. And this is the part where it begins, very quietly, to crack. The tabloids arrived with the fame. This is not unusual in Hollywood. Attention and intrusion tend to travel together. But the particular quality of scrutiny that attached itself to Panettiere was notable for its intimacy, her weight, her relationships. The gap between the image Neutrogena required and the image the paparazzi were determined to capture. She had signed the contract as a teenager and was now living inside its terms as a young adult. Every public appearance a negotiation between who she was and who the brand required her to be. "I never let the paparazzi see me holding a drink," she wrote in her memoir.
Underage Neutrogena girls didn't do that. And while I didn't force myself to dress modestly, I never showed too much skin. I started walking through my life playing the role of Hayden Panettiere, Neutrogena girl, and at times that was a high standard impossible to uphold. Once again, I couldn't stand to let anyone down. The cost of that sentence, "I couldn't stand to let anyone down," is not a small one. It belongs to a person who has been taught, for as long as she can remember, that love is conditional on performance. That the appropriate response to pressure is to tighten, not to yield. She was 18 years old when it happened the first time, the kind of event that doesn't announce itself as an event until long after it has already shaped everything that follows.
She had been invited onto a boat by someone she described in her memoir as a protector. A trusted figure in her industry circle, someone she had grown to trust and see as someone who had my back. The outing began normally, a gathering, conversation, an afternoon at sea. Then she was walked downstairs into a small room and physically placed into a bed next to a man she described only as very famous and undressed. Someone for whom the arrangement, she wrote, seemed like just an average day. She had no way to leave. She was, in her own phrase, quite literally out to sea. She got out of the bed. She hid. She understood, with a clarity she would spend years trying to articulate, that she was in an industry where this particular kind of transaction had a long history and no enforceable prohibition. There was nobody, she wrote, who was going to be empathetic to my situation. This was nothing new to them. Panettiere described this incident in her memoir and in a May 2026 appearance on the On Purpose with Jay Shetty podcast. She did not name the man. She named what it cost her, the destruction of her ability to trust the people she needed most. She had already lost her mother to the contract. She had now lost, or very nearly lost, the category of person she might otherwise have leaned on, the older woman in the industry who was supposed to know how things worked and keep her safe. "When you really find somebody that you trust," she said, "you hold on to them for dear life, and you feel so lucky. So to be betrayed like that." She did not finish the sentence on the podcast. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, Heroes ran for 4 seasons, 2006 to 2010. During its peak years, Panettiere received more fan mail than most actors receive in a career.
She moved into a house in Palisades that she purchased with her own earnings, a house she would later describe as the last place my family all lived together. She was 16 when she bought it. The deed was in her name. The mortgage was her responsibility. She was not old enough to vote. This is what child stardom produces in its most functional form. A teenager who owns property, supports a household, and has not yet learned that the body accumulates everything it has been asked to perform. Then came the moment she had rehearsed without knowing she was rehearsing. Heroes was in production. She was 19. She walked to her mother's trailer on set during a lunch break, closed the door, and said the thing she had been building toward for years. The words were, in their simplicity, the most precise thing she ever said to Lesley Vogel. "I don't want us to work together anymore. I just want you to be my mom." Lesley Vogel's response did not take long. Her mother told her she owed her. "You owe me." That was the answer, not "I understand," not "let me think about it," not even "no." The answer was a debt. A reckoning of the investment, the years, the work, framed as a claim that her daughter was not entitled to separate the professional from the maternal. The industry had taken Lesley Vogel's career. She had poured what remained of that ambition into Hayden, and now Hayden was asking to stop paying. She did not stop paying. Not then. The professional relationship continued. But something had been named, and once named, it could not be unnamed. Milo Ventimiglia, her hero's co-star, became her boyfriend during this period. He was 29, she was 18. The relationship was public enough to generate tabloid coverage, and private enough, she later wrote, to have moments of genuine tenderness alongside a power imbalance that she was not, at 18, equipped to fully perceive. She has spoken about him with care and without rancor. He is not the villain of this story, but the pattern is worth noting. The people she was drawn to throughout her 20s were people with more power than she had, in an industry that had taught her that proximity to power was the closest available approximation of safety. Heroes ended in 2010. 4 seasons. She was 21. The machine, satisfied with what she had produced, was already looking for the next thing she could give it. It found one in 2012, when ABC launched Nashville, a drama about the country music industry set in Tennessee, built around the collision between an established star and an ambitious newcomer. Panettiere was cast as Juliet Barnes, a young singer who had climbed from poverty to fame, who was charming and difficult and self-destructive and brilliant, who made decisions the audience couldn't always defend and felt things the audience couldn't always follow. It was, by every critical measure, the best acting of her career. It earned her 2 Golden Globe nominations. The show ran for 6 seasons. And it began, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, to mirror something she was living through in real time. The character had a drinking problem. The actress was developing one. The character's personal life was spiraling. So was the actress's. The character in the later seasons would develop postpartum depression. The actress already had it. She just didn't know it yet. Nashville ran through 2018. By the time it ended, Hayden Panettiere had given the show 6 years of her 30s. She had also given those years, in private, to something no one on set mentioned, and no one in the industry addressed. What it was, what it cost, is where this story is going. But first, there is one more thing she gave to that period that cannot be recovered, and it has a name. Her daughter was born on December 9th, 2014. The birth was not what she had imagined. Kaya Evdokia Klitschko arrived by emergency C-section on December 9th, 2014. The surgery was traumatic. the kind of delivery that leaves marks the body does not easily explain to itself. Panettiere wrote in her memoir that the experience fractured something in the very first hours. Kaya was just there, and now I had to figure out how to bond with her. It felt like an insurmountable task, and I was only on the first day. She had grown up around women who described motherhood in a particular register: warmth, instinct, recognition, the overwhelming arrival of love. No one she knew had ever described what she was feeling. I'd never been around anybody who had ever experienced postpartum depression before, she said in a May 2026 appearance on Jay Shetty's On Purpose podcast. I'd never heard it spoken about. My mom, the females in my life, nobody ever said anything about it. All of their stories were of these beautiful, positive moments of joy and love. What she felt was the opposite of that. Stress without cause, anxiety without object, tears she could not account for and could not stop. And then, in the weeks after Kaya's birth, a solution that presented itself with the quiet efficiency of habit: alcohol. The first thing I thought of when I woke up was alcohol, she wrote, not my child, not my job, and not the rest of my life. I needed a drink to function. At 6 a.m. By the time Kaya was 4 months old, Panettiere was drinking a bottle of wine at night and finishing a mini bottle of Fireball before the morning was half over. She was self-medicating something that had a name she did not yet know, using a substance whose grip she had been underestimating since the machine first handed her a pill at 15. When Kaya was 4 months old, between the 3rd and 4th seasons of Nashville, while her daughter's father managed the infant in the next room, Panettiere entered a treatment facility for the first time. It was, she wrote, a hugely expensive facility devoted to one-on-one care. The staff treated her for alcoholism. No one at the facility, across the entire duration of her stay, raised the possibility that she might be experiencing postpartum depression. She left clean and sober. She went home in denial. The idea, she wrote, that a little liquid could take me down or rule my life seemed impossible for a tough girl like me. She returned to the set of Nashville. Her character, Juliet Barnes, was written that season to develop postpartum depression. The specificity of that coincidence is worth sitting with. The writers did not know what was happening to their actress. The actress had not told them, and yet there she was, on camera, playing out, with professional precision, the exact emotional experience she was living through in private. Juliet Barnes had postpartum depression, Panettiere wrote, and alcohol and pill problems, and a divorce on the horizon. She was erratic, an absentee mother, and fought with everyone, including her fans. She was describing her character. She was also describing herself. The boundary between the two had become, in the machine's peculiar logic, functionally irrelevant. The performance was the product. The product was what mattered. Whether the actress was well enough to sustain it was a separate question the industry was not in the habit of asking. Then September 2015 arrived, and she did something the machine had not prepared for. She told the truth. On Live with Kelly and Michael, asked about her experience as a new mother, Panettiere did not perform the answer. She said, with the precision of someone who had spent months trying to understand her own experience, that postpartum depression was real, that it was broad, that it was frightening, that women needed support, and that it needed to be talked about. The interview was received warmly. The audience appreciated the candor. Vogue wrote that she had changed the public's understanding of the condition. Within days of the broadcast, she received a call about her Neutrogena contract. The company wanted to know whether the disclosure constituted a violation of her morality clause. Her representative told them it was illegal to pursue that line. The immediate termination was averted.
The contract, however, was not renewed the following year. A decade of partnership, the 10-year relationship that had shaped her public image since she was a teenager, ended without a send-off, without a conversation, without anyone at the company calling to ask whether she was all right. "I remember not hearing a word from anybody," she told Jay Shetty. "Not a great working with you for 10 years. I remember that really breaking my heart." She entered a second treatment facility in late 2015, this time specifically for postpartum depression. She returned to Nashville. The debilitating anxiety returned with her. To manage the insomnia, doctors prescribed medication, powerful sleep aids that, she wrote, created a new dependency to replace the one she had just treated. "I'd walked into rehab addicted to one substance," she wrote, "and I'd walked out completely dependent on something else." One morning on set, she closed her eyes in the makeup chair. She opened them in a hospital. A colleague had found her on a sofa, unresponsive. The events between the makeup chair and the hospital room she could not account for. Her liver was showing the damage. A doctor, reviewing her charts and her history, delivered a warning she carried in her body for years afterward. If she did not stop drinking, she would be dead within 5 years. She was 26 years old. Vladimir Klitschko, the former world heavyweight boxing champion, who had been her partner since 2009 and her fiancé since 2013, had remained with her through the first hospitalization, through the treatment, through the return to Nashville and the return of the anxiety. But the distance was structural as well as emotional. He was in Ukraine. She was in Los Angeles, and their daughter was caught between two people who were doing the best they could with what remained of themselves. By 2018, the relationship had ended. Kaya went to Ukraine with her father. The arrangement that followed was not, Panettiere was careful to say, a hostile one. Klitschko did not take Kaya from her, but the custody papers that came were for full custody, and she, still in the early stages of her second attempt at sobriety, signed them. "It was the worst," she told the hosts of Red Table Talk years later, her voice carrying the particular weight of something she had rehearsed saying without ever making it easier to say. "Signing those papers, the most heartbreaking thing I've ever had to do in my life." Kaya was 2 years old. For the years that followed, the years when Nashville finished its run and the cameras stopped, and the schedule that had organized every day of her life since she was 4 years old simply ceased, Panettiere had no structure except the structure she could build herself. She had a daughter she could not hold. She had a face the industry had photographed for 3 decades and was no longer especially interested in. She had a body that was keeping score of everything it had been asked to absorb. She also, in 2018, met Brian Hickerson. The FaceTime calls with Kaya were not enough, and she knew it. There is a particular grief in parenting across a screen. The lag, the freeze, the way a child's face pixelates at exactly the moment she laughs so that you catch the sound before you catch the expression. Panettiere did not speak often about what those calls cost her. She spoke around them, in the way people speak around the things that are too precisely painful to describe at full volume. What she said, in the end, was simpler. She had wanted to protect her daughter from the industry that had taken everything from her. She had decided, in the logic of someone who had been damaged by proximity to the machine, that the best protection she could offer Kaya was distance from herself. That sentence carries the weight of everything the machine had taught her. The lesson she had learned, in 30 years of performing pain for the approval of adults, was that love required sacrifice, and that the appropriate sacrifice, when you were not well enough to give what was needed, was to remove yourself from the equation entirely. She was the woman the industry had built, and this is what it had built her to believe. Brian Hickerson entered her life in the summer of 2018. He was not famous. He was not in the industry. He was, by the accounts she later offered, someone who felt different from the men she had known, less calculating, less transactional, less interested in the version of her that existed for the camera. She was 28 years old, newly single, newly without a television show, newly without the structure that had organized every waking hour of her existence since she was 4. She needed something she could not name precisely. He seemed, for a time, to provide it. What the legal record shows is this. In May 2019, the Los Angeles Police Department responded to a call from Panettiere's Panettiere home. Hickerson was arrested on suspicion of domestic violence. The charges were later dropped. In July of that year, he was arrested again in Wyoming on a domestic battery charge following an incident involving Panettiere. He pleaded not guilty. In May 2020, he was arrested a third time, this occasion documented with particular specificity in court records, after allegedly punching Panettiere with a closed fist on the right side of her face. In 2021, Brian Hickerson pleaded no contest to 2 felony counts of injuring a spouse, cohabitant, or partner. He was sentenced to 45 days in jail and 4 years of probation. 45 days. Panettiere recalled the progression in her memoir with a restraint that is more damning than anger would have been. "The slaps became hits," she wrote. And then, one night, he hit her hard enough that she did not recognize her own face. She had grown up playing a girl who could not be permanently injured. Every wound healed. Every fall was survivable. The audience had watched her regenerate on screen so many times that the image had calcified into something close to expectation. This one is indestructible. What the audience did not see, what the contracts and the cameras and the morality clauses were never designed to capture, was a woman in her late 20s, standing in front of a bathroom mirror trying to account for what she was looking at. The restraining order came in 2020. It was a 5-year order. She enforced it for a time, then, as she acknowledged in interviews, the relationship resumed on an on-again, off-again basis, the pattern familiar to anyone who has studied domestic violence not as a moral failure but as a clinical one. The cycle of escalation and reconciliation, the way trauma bonds operate not through weakness but through the specific neurological architecture of intermittent reinforcement. She had been conditioned, since she was 4 years old, to return to situations that hurt her because the approval that followed the pain was the closest thing she knew to love. She entered an intensive treatment program in early 2020. 8 months, the longest she had ever stayed. She described it in interviews as the first time she had felt genuinely present in years, not performing recovery, not managing perception, but actually sitting still long enough to encounter herself. "After 8 months of intensive therapy," she said, "I felt like I had this blank canvas to work with." She underwent trauma therapy. She worked a 12-step program. She came out the other side of 2020 with something she had not possessed since before she could walk. She had, for the first time in her life, a self that did not belong to a contract. She was 31 years old. The industry, for its part, had not been waiting. The tabloids that had photographed her lowest moments, the weight fluctuations that accompanied her addiction, the appearances that did not match the Neutrogena image they had spent a decade cementing in the public mind, had published those photographs without comment and without context. The machine does not explain its products. It only evaluates whether they are still useful. What brought her back was Scream. In 2022, the producers of the Scream franchise reached out about the 6th installment. Her character, Kirby Reed, had been left for dead in Scream 4, stabbed, bleeding on a kitchen floor. The scene cut before the audience was given a definitive answer about whether she survived.
Panettiere had spent 12 years telling interviewers, with a persistence that was half joke and half genuine grievance, that Kirby deserved better. She had negotiated her return. She had also, she revealed in her memoir, negotiated a no-kill clause, a contractual guarantee that her character would survive the film. It was, in its small way, the first contract she had ever signed on her own terms. Scream 6 premiered on March 6, 2023. She was on the red carpet. She was sober. She was, by every visible measure, in the middle of a genuine second act. The kind of return the industry occasionally allows when it decides the story is worth telling again. But 3 weeks before the premiere, on February 19, 2023, her brother died, N. 3 weeks later, on February 19, 2023, her brother died. Jansen Hayden Panettiere was 28 years old. He was found in his apartment in Nyack, New York. The cause of death, confirmed by the family, was cardiomegaly, an enlarged heart, coupled with aortic valve complications. He had not known he was sick. There had been no warning, no diagnosis, no chance to prepare. He was there, and then he was not. Hayden Panettiere had one sibling. She had spent her childhood working alongside him on sets. She had watched him try to build an acting career in the long shadow of her own. She had been sober and working and cautiously optimistic about the year ahead when the call came. "He was my only sibling," she told People magazine in a September 2024 cover story, the first extended interview she gave after his death. "And he was my younger sibling, and it was my job to protect him." She had not protected him. She could not have protected him. The condition that killed him was undetected by everyone, including him. But the logic of protection is not always the logic of facts. She had been taught, since she was 4 years old, that the appropriate response to failure was to absorb it. She absorbed it. Her body responded to the grief in the way bodies respond to unbearable stress when they have exhausted every other option. She gained 40 pounds in a matter of months. "I just ballooned out," she told People. "It didn't matter what I did, what I ate." She became agoraphobic. She could not leave the house. She could not look at herself in a mirror. The woman who had been photographed since she was 8 months old, who had learned to perform for cameras before she could form a sentence, could not stand to see her own reflection. For a time, she disappeared. And during the period she disappeared, something was taking shape. She had been working on a book, had been working on it in various forms for years, and now she returned to it with a different urgency. Not the urgency of promotion or of managing a narrative, but the urgency of someone who has lost enough that silence no longer feels like protection. She titled it, "This Is Me, A Reckoning." She had something to say about the machine, and she had decided finally to say it. This Is Me, A Reckoning was published on May 19, 2026. It debuted as an instant New York Times bestseller and a USA Today bestseller. It was 320 pages long. It covered, in Panettiere's own voice and prose, her upbringing in New Jersey, her own voice and on her own terms, everything the industry had spent 36 years managing on her behalf. The pills at 15, the yacht at 18, the postpartum depression that no one at her first rehab facility mentioned, the Neutrogena morality clause, the custody papers, the hits that became something worse than hits, the doctor's warning, the brother's death, the agoraphobia, the mirror she could not look into. She named the patterns. She named the cost. She named herself. She had spent the spring of 2026 on a press tour, podcasts, morning shows, magazine profiles, doing the work of a debut author who believed in what she had written. She was 36 years old. She was sober. She was, in the words of multiple interviewers who met her during those weeks,
present in a way she had not been in years. Gayle King, who interviewed her for CBS, described the encounter warmly. The Hollywood Reporter gave her a full-length feature. She sat with Jay Shetty for the better part of an hour and spoke about things she had never spoken about publicly before. She came out as bisexual in an interview with Us Weekly ahead of the book's release, a disclosure she had been holding for years, one she described as overdue and exhausting to have withheld. "It was always the fear of not being perfect," she said, "and what my team was going to think about it, what the public's opinion was going to be about it. It's sad that I had to wait till I was 36 years old to share that part of me." She talked about Neutrogena. In the Hollywood Reporter interview, she said it plainly, in the language of someone who had thought it through and was no longer interested in managing the response. "Like really, of all the things that people representing your company have done, the thing that you're going to say is not allowed and that breaks the morality clause is speaking about my postpartum depression? That's not a moral thing, that's just a scientific thing. That's not even legal. You cannot legally fire somebody for having postpartum depression. It's not a choice I made. It wasn't my fault." Neutrogena's stock declined in the days following her death. Fans posted boycott pledges in the brand's comment sections across social media. The company did not respond publicly to her claims. It had not responded when she made them in May. It did not respond in August. The silence, for anyone who had been following the arc of her life, was familiar. The machine does not explain itself. It only evaluates whether the product is still useful. She was still on tour, still present, still speaking, when something else resurfaced from the memoir. The passage about the pills at 15. The passage about the boat at 18. The passage about what the industry had handed her and what it had never asked. A generation of women who had grown up watching her. On Heroes, on Nashville, in the Scream films, in the cheerleading movies of the early 2000s, read those passages and felt the specific shock of recognition that arrives when a public story finally admits what the private version always knew. "We grew up with Hayden Panettiere," Refinery 29 wrote in a piece published the day after her death. "Now we're reckoning with how Hollywood failed her." For 36 years, Hollywood told the world to save the cheerleader. Every time she tried to ask for help, the industry handed her a contract, a morality clause, or a pill. Not once. Not at 15, not at 18, not at 26, not at 31, did it ask the question that might have changed the arithmetic. "Are you okay?" She was not okay. She had said so, finally, in 320 pages, and the world had listened, and applauded, and moved on to the next news cycle. On August 16, 2026, 5 days before her 37th birthday, a friend dialed 911 at approximately 1:50 in the afternoon. Emergency medical services responded to a residence in Greenville, South Carolina, where Hayden Panettiere had been temporarily staying. She was found unresponsive. The Greenville County Coroner's Office confirmed that she was in cardiac arrest when first responders arrived. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. She was pronounced deceased at 2:32 p.m. An autopsy completed the following day found no signs of trauma. The official cause of death, the coroner's office stated, remained under investigation, pending toxicology results and additional studies. She was 36 years old. Her memoir returned to #1 on Amazon's biography chart. In the hours and days that followed, tributes arrived from the people who had known her. Viola Davis wrote on Instagram that she was an amazing talent. Connie Britton, her Nashville co-star, called her supremely talented and lovely. Beth Chamberlain, who had shared scenes with her on Guiding Light when Hayden was a child, wrote, "She was the most brilliant child actor I've ever seen." And then, Lesley Vogel spoke. Panettiere's mother,
the woman who had stood behind the camera when Hayden was 11 months old, who had managed her career for 2 decades, who had told her she owed her when she asked for her mother back, who had chosen no contact after the memoir named what their relationship had cost, gave a statement to NBC News. "I think Hayden was an amazingly talented person," Vogel said. "And I think young people who grow up in the entertainment industry, it is a struggle, and it's a very challenging industry, and it's not unusual for them to sadly find the wrong path." She paused. "I think it becomes very difficult to be true to yourself, and I think Hayden sadly lost her way, and I wish it were different." Lost her way. Gayle King, reading those words on air, said what many people were thinking with a directness that cut through the production values of morning television. "You know, guys, you read this and all I can think is, thanks, Mom, for nothing." On social media, the responses were less restrained. "No fame can replace a mother," one person wrote. "I feel sorry that she probably didn't get to be a daughter even for a single day in her life, a truly loved daughter, rather than a source of money." Lesley Vogel had managed Hayden's image for 20 years. She had shaped the product. She had negotiated the terms, and when the product was gone, when her daughter was 5 days from 37 and no longer breathing, she stood before a camera and delivered the only verdict she seemed to have available. She lost her way. The machine, even now, could not stop performing. Somewhere in Ukraine, there is a girl named Kaya. She is 11 years old. She has her mother's face, the same structure, the same quality of attention in the eyes that cameras spent 3 decades trying to capture. She has grown up largely outside the public record, protected by distance and by a father who understood, whatever else complicated his relationship with Hayden Panettiere, that a child deserved the childhood her mother had never been given. Kaya has not been photographed at red carpets. She has not been placed in front of a camera. She has not been asked to perform. In the months before her mother died, Hayden had told interviewers that Kaya was beginning to show an interest in acting. She mentioned it with a kind of careful pride, the pride of a parent who wants to encourage without pushing, who knows with a precision earned through 36 years of first-hand evidence exactly what the encouraging can cost. She did not say she would stop her. She said she wanted her to go in with her eyes open. Kaya will read the book one day. This is Me, A Reckoning, the memoir that Hayden Panettiere published 89 days before she died, the book that returned to #1 on Amazon the morning the news broke, the book that a generation of women read in the days after August 16th with the particular grief of people who recognized something they had not been able to name. We'll be there when Kaya is ready for it. It will tell her, in her mother's own voice and on her mother's own terms, what it cost to be Hayden Panettiere, what the machine required, what it took, and what it left behind. It will tell her about the pills at 15. It will tell her about the trailer on the Heroes set and the words her grandmother said when asked to simply be a mother. It will tell her about the morning at 6 a.m. and the bottle that was there before anything else was. It will tell her about the papers she signed when Kaya was 2 years old, not because she didn't love her, but because the thing she had been taught to believe in 30 years of performing pain for the approval of adults was that love sometimes required you to remove yourself from the equation, that the truest thing a damaged person could offer the people she loved was her own absence. The machine had taught her that. The machine had been teaching her that since she was 4 years old, in a soap opera where a child survived leukemia on cue, and the adults in the room gave her attention when she performed the suffering correctly. What the machine could not teach her, what she had to find herself in 8 months of intensive therapy and in the 320 pages she left behind, was that the opposite was also true, that showing up, imperfect and present and honest about the cost, was its own form of protection. That the truth, spoken plainly, does not require a morality clause. She was 5 days from 37 when she ran out of time. The tagline from Heroes, "Save the cheerleader, save the world," was a television promise, the kind of sentence a writer's room constructs to give an audience something to hold on to across a commercial break. In the logic of the show, saving Claire Bennett mattered because Claire Bennett could not be permanently hurt. She healed. She came back. Every wound closed. Hayden Panettiere was not Claire Bennett. She was a woman who had been asked to perform invincibility since before she could walk, in an industry that confused the performance with the person, that handed her pills and contracts and morality clauses and called it care, that photographed her lowest moments and published them without context and moved on to the next story. She was also a woman who wrote it all down, who named every room she had been walked into without her consent, who said, at 36, on a press tour for a book she had earned the right to publish, that postpartum depression was real, that addiction was real, that the industry had failed her and failed others, and that she would not stop saying so. The book is still there. Kaya will be ready for it when she is ready. And somewhere in that, in the 11-year-old girl in Ukraine who has her mother's face and has not yet been asked to perform, something survived the machine after all.